What's up, AP Psych? Welcome back. We're moving on to our next topic in this unit, continuing our next topic, I should say, with emotion. But we're moving on to experiencing emotion and expressing emotion. So we'll get into how our body interprets the way people express certain things, but also how we experience our own emotions and feelings with this video. So, jumping in, how are emotions expressed? Two ways, unconsciously and consciously. And each is going to be kind of controlled and experienced at different parts and different levels of the brain. So unconsciously, it's our fast response system that relies on deep brain circuitry that operates automatically. So when we're talking about our deep brain circuitry, we're talking like the limbic system there, your hypothalamus, your amygdala, your hippocampus. All of those things can act as an early defense that produces emotions to help us get out of dangerous situations. So we think of amygdala as our fight or flight response, gets our autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic subset of that going so that we don't have to think and we can just react, and our emotions help us get out of potentially dangerous situations, things like that. On the flip side, you have consciously, and this generates emotions at a little bit of a slower rate. And as a result, it delivers more complete information to our consciousness, and we can react more appropriately through our emotions, right? And this relies heavily on the cerebral cortex. That's our higher level thinking, higher level processing abilities of our brain. And so that tells us, after our unconscious emotions occur, we can think and process through that and consciously feel kind of like the correct emotions in certain situations, and hopefully be able to come to the proper emotional conclusion in those situations. So we talked about a little bit about the biological structures on the last slide, but what specific structures are involved in our processing of emotion? We mentioned the limbic system, specifically your amygdala, right? And what types of emotions would be processed here? Think back to unit, biological psychology unit. We know mostly it's fear and aggression, right? And the amygdala is continuously alert for threats. It's there to help protect us. It's help us to react in stressful situations and dangerous situations. Okay? And it's linked very closely with our hippocampus. So those memories of past experiences or similar situations can also aid in our reaction through our amygdala. Okay? Then, there's the limbic system. You got the amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and that's the old brain structures that help us react unconsciously and emotionally. Okay? Then you have your reticular formation. This works with the thalamus and the amygdala to monitor incoming information. So if a threat is detected, it sends responses or sets our response in motion. That arouses the body into action, right? So remember that reticular formation is that bundle of nerves that has projections out across your brain so that it can activate and arouse the proper brain structures in order to react to a situation. Right? So those are two major brain structures in our processing of emotion and experience of emotion. In addition, you have the cerebral cortex. This is our higher level thinking. It interprets events and associates them with memories and feelings. So it takes a little bit longer to go through and process these things, but it separates our basic instinctual emotions from our higher level processed emotions. And on the right side of the cerebral cortex, the right hemisphere, specializes or lights up or is engaged in negative emotions, and the left hemisphere is engaged when we experience positive emotions. So that might be something to note. It's the second time we've touched on that in our discussion of emotion. Then as you also have the autonomic nervous system. We talked about the amygdala's role with that, but you have the sympathetic, becomes active when one is startled or experience an unpleasant emotion such as anger or fear. Again, this is all review of our Unit 3 biological psych. And then you have the parasympathetic emotion. And this dominates in pleasant emotions. When our body returns to homeostasis, we're experiencing good things, we're happy. Our parasympathetic is dominating those situations. You also have certain hormones that are present when we experience certain emotions. Serotonin aids in feelings of sadness, depression. Epinephrine is produced in our fear response. That gets the sympathetic nervous system going, and it aids with the adrenal glands. And then you have norepinephrine, which is more abundant in anger. Right? And these hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are similar, but they can produce different emotional responses, specifically fear for epinephrine and anger for norepinephrine. Okay, So how do we experience some of these specific emotions? Well, Carol Izard identified 10 basic emotions at infancy that could not be reduced to more basic emotions, but they can be combined to produce other more complex feelings, right? So these 10 basic emotions that she identified were joy, interest, surprise, sadness, anger, disgust, contempt, fear, shame, and guilt. Okay, so those are 10 important basic emotions to recognize. You can see some of them on the faces here of these infants that she would have studied in this example. So let's go through a couple of these specifically. Fear. We learn fear through conditioning and observation. Okay, we've talked about operant conditioning and classical conditioning. This is when we associate our emotions with specific situations. Okay, we can be operantly conditioned for fear through punishments, right? And we can be classically conditioned through experiencing and associating a situation and remembering that and fearing it in the future. But we also learn fear through observation, or what we've talked about as vicarious learning is another term for it. But we watch others display fear in response to certain events or surroundings. For example, maybe you didn't fear spiders as a young child until one of your friends or family members, you saw them react in a negative way to a spider, right? And you learned, oh, maybe I should fear them, right? Something like that, or similar to snakes, things like that. But there also is a biological aspect to fear. And we are biologically predisposed to learn fear and to learn fear to particular items because the fear response helps us survive, right? So some spiders are poisonous. Some snakes are poisonous. Heights are very dangerous in certain situations. So people have these inborn fears that help us survive. And again, our amygdala plays a key role in associating emotions with specific situations. And we can remember those associations because our amygdala and our hippocampus are so closely connected, right? However, if you damage your amygdala, your emotion is not associated with that specific situation. So your response can be diminished, right? If you have some type of traumatic event that has brain damage that impacts your amygdala or your hippocampus, you may have a diminished fear response to something that you used to fear significantly. All right, moving on to anger and how we experience anger. What makes us angry? This is a little bit different than fear because there are so many different situations that can cause anger, right? Many different factors, anything from misdeeds of a loved one or a friend who does something that wrongs you. Just basic aches and pains can make people angry. Lack of sleep can lead to anger. You've ever been hungry? Hanger, right? Hangry, you can get hangry from that. So there's a lot of different things that can lead to anger. But the question being, is anger good or bad? And there's a little bit of both in the answer. So chronic hostility is linked to heart disease because if you're constantly angry, your body's constantly going through that stress response. Your autonomic nervous system is fired up. And that puts a lot of strain on your body, specifically your heart. So controlled expression of anger can be good. And that's better than pent up anger or irrational anger. You want to get that expression of anger out, but you have to do it in a positive way. Okay. It can lead a person to talk over the offense rather than ignore it or stew about it. Right. If you can find a way to proactive, positively express yourself and your feelings, that's a great way to do it. So how we know this, there's something called the catharsis hypothesis. And this just states that releasing aggressive energy relieves aggressive urges. Okay, if you ever heard people say, that experience was very cathartic or crying over that was really cathartic for me, this is what they're talking about. They're releasing some type of aggressive energy to relieve their aggressive urges. When we get into Freud's defense mechanisms and we talk about sublimation, it would be taking these aggressive urges and putting them into something positive. And that could be a good way to handle it as well. But research has shown that expressing anger can be temporarily calming. However, it does not usually clear the feelings of rage, right? So even if you're doing something cathartic, you're then going to need to find another way to get over those feelings. Okay? So you need to be careful of how much rage you're expressing and how often you're doing that, because expressions of anger can lead to even more hostility and cruelty because of the reinforcement you experience. When you get that anger and rage off your chest and you feel good, right? It's like a reinforcer. You want to do it again. But if you do it too consistently, you just become a habitually angry person that no one wants to be around, right? And it can have impacts on your physical health. So how should we deal with it? If you're angry, upset, feeling some type of rage, waiting until your physical arousal, your sympathetic nervous system calms down, and then expressing your grievances in a manner that promotes reconciliation or some type of solution to your problem is the best way to do it, right? And that's why, as a kid, whenever you talk to your family members or people, when you get angry and they say count to 10 and try to calm down, or if you're upset at someone over a particular issue, a lot of people say, sleep on it for a night, see how you feel in the morning, because a lot of times that extra time will help calm you down and you have a more clear mind so that you can allow your cerebral cortex to process through those emotions rather than your amygdala and your deep brain structures. So our last thing is happiness. And people who are happy, they perceive the world as safer. They make decisions more easily. They're more cooperative. They live happier lives. They're just report more general life satisfaction. So it's a great thing to try to find happiness and be happy. But how do we do that? So there's a feel good, do good phenomenon, and people tend to help others when they're in a good mood, right? And it's kind of like this cycle of happiness that they experience. Have you ever seen that Coke commercial, people helping each other, and just continues the cycle all day? It makes sense, right? If you've had a no good, really bad day, you're not going to feel like you want to help anyone else, right? But if you've had a great day, you feel like you want to pay it forward, and you're much more likely to help someone in a situation that they need it. And that can continue your happiness into the future. Now, we know that daily events generally only cause your mood to be altered for that day. So even if you experience something seriously negative or bad, that seldom can destroy happiness permanently. Okay? And there's also a term called adaptation level phenomenon. And this impacts our happiness as we go throughout life. It's our tendency to judge various stimuli as relative to those we have previously experienced. So we adjust our neutral levels and then notice and react to variations up or down from these levels. So essentially it's saying, the happier we become, that becomes our new normal. And we need to experience more happiness in order to continue that feeling. So here's an example for you. If you won the lottery tomorrow, according to this principle, you would have a surge of happiness initially. It'd be great. You're like, I have $100 million. I can buy a new house. I can travel. I can do all these experiences. I'm so happy about this. And after a year, you've adapted to your new lifestyle and you come to consider it as normal. So those things and doing those things doesn't make you happy anymore. And you require something even better to give you another surge of happiness, right? So humans adjust, and that's that adaptation level phenomenon, which is an interesting aspect to our feelings of happiness. So to wrap things up, what seems to be correlated with happiness and life satisfaction? Well, if you have high self-esteem and you have a good view of yourself and you don't allow the expectations of others in society to impact how you feel about yourself, that can lead to happiness. Optimistic attitude, if you look at things as glass half full and I can figure out this problem instead of the opposite, you're much more likely to be happy. If you have close friendships or if you have satisfying relationships in your love life or just in general with your family, that leads to happiness. If you enjoy what you do in your work or you have hobbies that engage your skills and challenge you, that leads to more life happiness. Meaningful religious faith has been shown to be correlated with happiness, as well as getting sleep and exercise that keeps your body healthy and keeps it in a good state of homeostasis and feeling happy. Okay. So that's a little bit about how we experience emotions and the brain structures that are involved in those experiences. We'll get into expression next, and then we'll wrap up with stress.